The gavel struck once, but the silence that followed was heavier than any jet Ethan had ever flown. The sound hung in the courtroom, echoing against the marble walls like the aftershock of a distant explosion. Fluorescent lights hummed above, their sterile glow catching the sheen of his polished boots. He stood rigid in his dress uniform, shoulders squared, eyes forward, just another soldier under scrutiny. Before we begin this mission, hit subscribe and ring the bell, because some stories of courage never made the headlines, but they deserve to be heard. Tell us where you're watching from and who's the hero in your family. Judge Marcus Heller leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled beneath a face carved from disdain. "Major Ethan Cole," he said slowly, savoring the formality. Or should I say, former Major. The words landed like small, deliberate cuts. Ethan's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. The air tasted of dust and old paper. Somewhere behind him, he could hear his daughter's soft breathing. Lena sat with her guardian, tiny legs swinging above the courtroom floor, her eyes wide but brave. She didn't understand the legal jargon, but she understood tone, and her father's silence. Heller smirked. "You've been out of service, 2 years now? Unemployed, living on base housing assistance, and still talking like you're saving the world." He flipped a page in the file before him. "Tell me, Major, what exactly qualifies you to raise a child when you can't even land a job?" Ethan's hands clenched behind his back. His heartbeat pounded in his ears, but his voice stayed calm. "My record speaks for itself, sir." "Oh, does it?" Heller's gaze sharpened. "Because according to this, your last mission was, yes, Operation Gray Star. Ended with civilian losses, if I recall. Classified, of course." He leaned forward, eyes glinting. "But maybe you can tell us. What went wrong, Shadowhawk?" The courtroom shifted, the name slicing through the silence. Ethan blinked once, slow. He hadn't heard that call sign spoken aloud in years. "Shadowhawk," Heller repeated, chuckling. "That was your call sign, wasn't it? Sounds like something out of a comic book, not a soldier." For a moment, Ethan wasn't standing in the courtroom anymore. He was back in the desert sky, 0300 hours, the cockpit of his A-10 Warthog vibrating around him, his oxygen mask pressed against his skin, his vision framed by a green-tinted HUD. Hawk 2, visual on convoy. The radio crackled. He remembered the dust storm rising like a living wall, radar signals scattering. They'd been told it was an enemy logistics column, coordinates confirmed, orders signed. But then, the lights below. The convoy wasn't armored. It was slow, unguarded, headlights too small, too scattered. Trucks, civilian, not military. Hawk 2, target confirmation requested. The silence that came after that message had been his first warning. He blinked, pulling himself back to the present. Heller was still watching, amused. "You were saying, Major?" Ethan exhaled through his nose, slow and deliberate. "I was saying, Your Honor, that my record reflects service and sacrifice. My personal life isn't on trial for your entertainment." The judge's lips twitched. "Careful, son. This isn't a debriefing. You're not in the cockpit anymore." "I noticed," Ethan said quietly. Lena shifted in her seat. She looked so small against the rows of uniforms and cold benches. The sight steadied him. Everything he'd endured, the crash, the inquiries, the dishonorable whispers, it had all been for her. Heller tapped his pen on the bench, rhythmic, taunting. "You see, I've met plenty of men like you. They hide behind call signs and medals, thinking the world owes them for doing their job. But families aren't missions, Major. You can't call in air support when it gets hard." Ethan didn't move. "No, sir. You just stand your ground." A flicker passed across Heller's face, something like annoyance, quickly buried beneath a smirk. He leaned back again, satisfied. "I think we've heard enough for today. Court is adjourned until Monday." The gavel came down once more. Ethan's shoulders eased only slightly. He turned to glance at Lena, who smiled in relief just because the talking had stopped. She didn't know the sting in his chest or the taste of swallowed pride. She just knew her father was still standing. As the courtroom emptied, Heller's voice carried across the room. Casual, cruel. "Oh, and Major, next time, maybe leave the call sign at home. No need for pretend heroes in my courtroom." Ethan stopped at the door. He could have turned, could have spoken, but instead he looked over his shoulder just once. The rain streaked down the tall windows behind the bench, blurring the judge's face into ripples of gray. He said nothing. Outside, the base air was cold and sharp. The wind smelled like jet fuel and wet asphalt. He buttoned Lena's coat and took her small hand. "We'll be fine," he said softly. "It's just another storm." But even as he spoke, the memory of that radio silence haunted him. The moment when command refused to answer, and he'd known, deep down, that someone had lied. He looked up at the clouds hanging low over the runway, heavy and dark. Somewhere beyond them, the night still echoed with the ghosts of that mission. And though the judge thought his words were a joke, Ethan understood something different. The name Shadowhawk wasn't a relic. It was unfinished business. He tightened his grip on Lena's hand and walked toward the hangar, where the past waited in classified files and sealed doors. Because some storms don't end, they circle back, and this one was coming home. She found him in the hangar, hands on cold steel, eyes fixed on ghosts only he could see. The air smelled of oil and rain, the kind that seeped through old roof panels and dripped in slow, patient rhythms. Ethan stood beside a gutted A-10, its fuselage stripped to bones, its purpose long since retired. His uniform jacket was folded on a crate, sleeves rolled, dog tags dangling like small reminders of a world that had stopped making sense. He'd been here for hours, collecting documents, trying to make sense of a life reduced to paper. Court filings, financials, custody evaluations. Proof that he could provide, even when the world seemed intent on saying otherwise. But each page reminded him of something else, everything the court refused to see. He flipped through a folder labeled Military Record, Cole, Ethan J. It was thin, too thin. Dozens of pages were missing, redacted or marked sealed by order. At the bottom, a single tab caught his eye. Operation Gray Star. He froze. That name hadn't crossed his mind in 2 years, not since the inquiry that stripped him of his wings. He opened it slowly. Blank pages, red stamps, fragments of coordinates. Nothing useful. Yet one timestamp stood out in faded ink. 02 Hansin, Zulu. His eyes narrowed. He remembered that moment, the chaos in the sky, the storm of static. Hawk 2. Visual on convoy. The radio memory came unbidden, sharp and vivid. He could still hear his own voice, steady but uncertain. Then the silence that followed. The moment command went dark. "Still chasing ghosts?" The voice startled him. Captain Mara Trent stepped from the shadows, her posture as sharp as ever. She wore civilian clothes now, but there was no mistaking the precision in her stride or the tension in her eyes. "Viper," he said softly. "Didn't expect to see you here?" She glanced at the open file. "I shouldn't be here." She hesitated, lowering her voice. "But you need to see something before that judge buries you for good." He studied her face. "You know about Heller?" "I know enough." She reached into her satchel and pulled out a sealed envelope, thick and creased at the edges. "They said these records were destroyed. They weren't." Ethan took the envelope carefully, as if it might detonate. Inside were photocopies, grainy and incomplete, but real. He scanned the first page. Authorization headers, clearance codes. Then one signature at the bottom. Marcus J. Heller, JAG officer, approving authority. His stomach turned cold. He signed off on Gray Star. Mara nodded. Worse than that, he issued the go order when the intel wasn't confirmed. We tried to abort, but the line was dead. Afterward, Command falsified the report, said it was you who misread the feed. He looked up, anger tightening his throat. They destroyed my unit over his mistake. They destroyed your life, she said quietly. And now he's sitting on that bench pretending it never happened. Ethan turned away, gripping the edge of the workbench until his knuckles whitened. For 2 years, he'd swallowed the rumors, endured the looks, the questions about his integrity, all because he'd followed an order that should never have been given. He pulled the next page from the envelope. Mission logs, partially redacted. A map grid, Sector Delta 4, grid 093227. His own call sign appeared beside the strike zone, Hawk 2. Beneath it, another tag, Viper 3. He looked at her. You were my wing. She nodded once, and I watched it happen. He didn't ask what she saw. He remembered. The convoy, headlights weaving through the dust, the flicker of heat signatures, the moment the first missile hit, and the sick realization too late that the vehicles carried families. Hawk 2, abort. This isn't the target. Static. Then Command's cold reply. Execute. He had executed. Because that was what soldiers did. Now, staring at the page in his hands, he felt the old guilt merge with something sharper. Clarity. The judge isn't after my parenting record, he said slowly. He's tying off loose ends. Mara's expression darkened. Exactly. That custody hearing. It's not a coincidence. You start speaking about the mission, they'll call you unstable. Unfit father, unreliable witness, he's covering himself. Ethan closed the file and slid it into a plain manila folder. Then I'll bring it into the open. You can't just walk it into court, she warned. It's still classified. If you expose it the wrong way, then I lose my daughter and my name. His voice was low, deliberate. But if I do nothing, I lose both anyway. Mara sighed, pacing the hangar's narrow aisle. There's a way. Unredacted copies exist on the base server. I pulled fragments before they wiped the drive. The rest you'll need authorization to access. He gave a humorless laugh. And who exactly would authorize that? She met his eyes. Colonel Knox. He oversaw the tribunal before Heller transferred. He's clean. Ethan's pulse quickened. You think Knox would listen? I think, she said, if he saw the evidence, he'd have no choice. For a moment, neither spoke. The hangar lights flickered overhead, casting blue-white shadows across the cracked floor. Beyond the open bay doors, lightning flared somewhere distant over the desert. Ethan stared at the storm, the wind tugging at his sleeves. 2 years, he murmured. 2 years of silence because I thought speaking would make me look weak. Mara's voice softened. You weren't weak, Hawk. You were loyal. He met her gaze. Loyalty got men killed. Then maybe it's time it got justice instead. He looked down at the folder, thumb tracing the name that had cost him everything. Heller's looping signature, confident and cruel. Justice, he echoed. Yeah, let's start with that. He tucked the file under his arm, the decision already made. Whatever came next wouldn't be about revenge. It would be about truth, the kind no one could redact. As they stepped out of the hangar, the rain hit hard, blurring the base lights into a haze of blue and gold. Mara pulled up her hood. Ethan didn't bother. He let the water soak through, washing away the dust, the hesitation, the shame. Tomorrow, the hearing would resume. But now, he had something stronger than hope. He had proof, and proof was the one weapon Judge Heller couldn't silence. The storm outside had only begun, and inside the courtroom, another one was waiting to break. When he said, "Permission to speak freely," no one expected the storm that followed. The courtroom was standing room only. The hum of whispered voices filled the air like static before a lightning strike. Rows of uniforms, medals gleaming under cold white lights lined the benches. Reporters waited behind the glass partition, pens poised. Judge Heller sat higher than them all, his robe immaculate, His smirk practiced. Ethan sat at the defense table. No lawyer, no theatrics, just a stack of files bound with trembling hands. His daughter's sketch of a hawk lay folded inside his jacket pocket, close to his heart. Heller's voice broke the tension. "Captain Rhodes," he began with feigned politeness, "we've heard enough of your war stories. This court is about custody, not combat." His gavel tapped once, a warning masked as authority. Ethan didn't move. His breathing was slow, deliberate, like he was lining up for a strike. "Permission to speak freely, Your Honor," he said, voice steady. Heller leaned back, indulging the moment. "By all means, Shadow Hawk, enlighten us." The nickname, the insult, rolled off Ethan's shoulders this time. He opened the folder. A low murmur rippled through the courtroom as classified headers flashed in red on the first page. Operation Gray Star, unredacted. Ethan's words came measured, each one a blade. 2 years ago, my unit flew under your authorization. You signed the order, and when the strike went wrong, when civilians died, you buried it under my name. Heller laughed, sharp and hollow. "You're grasping at ghosts, Captain. Those records are sealed for national security." Ethan met his gaze. "Not anymore." Colonel Knox, seated in the rear as tribunal observer, rose slowly. His voice carried like a command across a parade ground. "Proceed, Captain." Ethan inserted a drive into the courtroom's display terminal. The screen behind Heller flickered to life. Grainy footage, cockpit HUDs, timestamps burned into the lower corner. 0217, Zulu, Operation Gray Star. Audio bled through, warped but clear. Hawk 1. Command, this isn't the target. Confirm abort. Command. Negative. Proceed. Authorization Alpha J. Ethan paused the video. Authorization Alpha J, he said quietly. Judge Aaron Heller, then Lieutenant Colonel, JAG Corps. The room froze. Heller's face drained of color. "This is inadmissible," he barked. "This is an illegal." Knox cut him off. "Sit down, Judge." Gasps broke from the benches. Someone whispered Ethan's call sign under their breath, Shadow Hawk, and it no longer sounded like mockery. It sounded like respect. Ethan let the next clip roll. Night vision showed the A-10's guns blazing across dunes, tracer rounds streaking through the dark. A convoy exploded, followed by a woman's cry picked up faintly over comms. Viper 3. Command. Target misidentified. Repeat. Misidentified. Command. All units disengage. Records to follow. The image froze again. Ethan's voice trembled. Not from fear, but from years of silence cracking open. "I lived with that sound every night. While you built your career on my wreckage, I told my daughter her father was still worth something." Heller slammed his gavel. "That file was sealed for a reason." Knox stepped forward, the insignia on his shoulder catching the light. "Yes, to protect the guilty." He turned to the security officer. "Remove him from the bench." Uniformed MPs moved in. Heller's protest echoed uselessly as they escorted him out. His robe flared like a flag torn down in a storm. Ethan exhaled, the weight of 2 years lifting an inch. The courtroom was silent now. No hum, no whispers, just the sound of truth settling into the air. Knox approached the stand. "Captain Rhodes," he said, "on behalf of the tribunal, your record is restored. The custody case will reflect this reversal immediately." Ethan nodded, unable to speak. His hand found Lena's small one at his side. She had been sitting quietly in the front row, feet barely touching the floor. She looked up at him with the same eyes that once watched jets trace the sky from their porch. "You did it, Daddy," she whispered. He knelt to her level. "No, sweetheart. The truth did." Outside, dawn was breaking. Light spilled through the courtroom doors, warm and golden against the cold walls. Reporters shouted questions as the pair walked out, but Ethan didn't answer. He didn't need to. Colonel Knox watched them go. Shadow Hawk, he said softly, more to himself than anyone. Mission complete. Ethan paused at the threshold, turned once toward the empty bench where Heller had sat, then stepped into the morning. The air smelled like jet fuel and rain. Somewhere far off, a training sortie climbed into the sky, engines roaring against the light. He looked down at Lena's drawing peeking from his pocket, the hawk in flight, and smiled. The storm was over, but the horizon was calling.